Why is there such a huge gap between what we think parenting will be and what it actually is?
We've become such warriors as parents, and it's almost like there's a sort of competitive worrying. And I get it. It's almost like if you're worrying, you're doing something.
What are the jobs of mums and dads now? What's a dad now he's no longer just a provider? What's a mum now that she often is?
So there's also this kind of very conscientious gene in quite a lot of mums, so anxious striving. We're the first generation who's had these opportunities. So we're damned if we're not giving it our all of which means that, the whole parenting thing can come with a whole bunch of guilt attached.
Why, when we think having children will bring us closer together, does it so often push us apart? What am I supposed to teach or model for my children when I have no idea what the world is going to look like in 5 years' time?
A really useful practical thing, again, is as much as you can to try and discuss things where there could be different opinions. So anything where it's possible to see it differently.
Why did my parents have so much conviction about these things and I have absolutely none? Well, I don't know, but there are some really intelligent people all around the world who've been thinking about this stuff, and they are going to talk to me, and we might not answer all those questions every week, but if we listen to their ideas, maybe we can get some wisdom and some insight, and maybe most importantly, some perspective, and find out what it takes to be a happier parent. Rachel Kelly is a journalist, a best-selling author, and a mental health advocate. But maybe most importantly, she has 5 children. She was a mother of teenagers for 15 years. We talk about her new book, The Gift of Teenagers, and she has some amazingly practical tips around how to have difficult conversations with teens, about nutrition, about sleep. But most importantly for me, this is an episode about an anxious generation of parents, about how our anxiety makes us try and control our children when really that's impossible. We also talk about how to connect with our teens and about judgment and the one surefire way for everyone to feel less judged. I hope you enjoyed the episode. You are a journalist. You've written extensively about mental health. You've written books about mental health, and then you turn your attention to teenagers.
Mm-hmm.
But I would say certainly the first third of the book, teenagers are largely absent.
There was this light bulb moment when I was having therapy quite a while ago, maybe 5-6 years ago, when the woman I was working with said, your main relationship is with yourself. So you, Alex, spend more time in your head with your thoughts and feelings than with anybody else. And I think maybe this is a bit gendered, but maybe as a woman, you define yourself in relationship to others, like you're somebody's mother, you're somebody's wife, somebody's daughter. And it was just this light bulb moment when I thought, okay, well, actually, I hang out with Rachel all the time. How could I have a better time with myself? And of course, it's from that place that then we're going to be more likely to have a better time with our teenagers. So that kind of explains the structure of the book, is like put your own oxygen mask on first, but very profoundly trying to understand who you are, what's going on, why are you trying to control people, especially teenagers? Are you compassionate yourself to yourself? How can you model that? So all those sorts of ideas that are in the first third of the book. It's called The Gift of Teenagers. Connect more, worry less. I've had my own story of my own background of quite severe depression and anxiety. So I was a pretty anxious mum. And bringing up teenagers can be really hard. But my experience is that they can be this blessing to us because we've got to go deeper. We've got to really understand ourselves, and we've got to really deal with some really strong feelings that come up. And so therefore it can be this incredible period of psychological growth. It's my 7th book, and it was the fruits of very extensive research and therapy, looking more broadly at communication, connection. By the way, we didn't even think much was happening in the teenage brain until about 15 years ago. But now we've been studying it and trying to figure out what's going on. So there's this huge push for autonomy. So teenagers want to be independent. There's this phrase called individuation. Erik Erikson was the psychologist who came up with it. It's basically this separation. So they're moving away from us. But the key thing is they do still want a connection with us. And we parents really want that connection with them, because what do we all really want more than anything? We want to connect, right? I want to connect with you. I want to connect with the barista in the coffee shop. I want to connect with my partner. I want to feel that sense of of being part and loved and loving and lovable and connected and all those sorts of things. And so that isn't any different with your teenager. That's what we want as well. And if you think about it, back to that autonomy, it's tricky because they are, on the one hand, becoming a burgeoning adult. And really, that's where we want to get to with our teenagers, because we've got to somehow replace need with love, which is that, yes, they do need this element of support, but they don't need us to make spaghetti bolognese. They can make their own bloody spaghetti bolognese. They are becoming adults, and we've got to say goodbye to that bit. But we want a relationship based on love and connection as adult to adult.
I think in some ways I'm sat here now talking to you because I had this moment where I came downstairs. My whole life was fatherhood. It was everything. I built my early, my career around it and everything. And then there was like no one there. And I said to Eloise, I was like, where is everyone? She was like, I don't know. And, it's like, they're just off and they're out. And I was like, right. And I sort of messaged Lila. I was like, I'm cooking. Do you want any? She was like, no, I'm going to make myself something with avocados when I get back. And I was like, what's happened?
I know.
Something huge has shifted. And in some ways, how liberating, but it made me quite panicked.
Completely,
and it was, I'm not needed. I'm not needed in the way I was before I came downstairs in my head. Like, it was this real moment.
Yeah, well, listen, I had similar moments, and it's really painful because everybody kind of thinks they need to be needed in that way. But you may be, it's possible to transition and to seg into a different kind of closeness, which isn't, you're not needed, as you say, like to cook dinner or to pick them up, but you can still have a really close relationship. That's why I don't really go.
And I think maybe what we're saying is that if you don't let go, if you don't realize that adjustment, then that need becomes very much about you rather than
and
them.
you've got to attend to the Alex who feels a bit redundant, a little bit rejected, no longer so relevant. And what else can be possible for you? I mean, that's one of my real phrases in the book and in the workshops working with parents and teachers, is like, what else could be possible? So, right, you're not needed to cook dinner, but what else could be possible? Could there be another way to stay close, and how are you going to do that? But I would start with the basic underlying sort of drumbeat. Alex has got to look after Alex first. You've got to get back to being nice and calm and settled and not feeling redundant and rejected and poor little Alex. Maybe you go and do something that you really want to do.
I mean, I'm a man. I'm really good at that anyway.
Yeah, but whatever it takes to sort of for you to get back on the level, and then address that relationship from that nice calm place, then rather than, because you can see it in action. It's really tragic when you get very needy parents who are desperately trying to cling on to this old relationship where it's like, I mean, take the image of a snake. It's like they're shedding skins, but actually you, Alex, are shedding skins too, and you can learn and grow. So that's another way that I think this is such an extraordinary positive time, because we're all learning and growing together. You kind of grow up with them, and you're changing and learning and growing, and so am I. So, you're very different at the end of this experience than when you started.
In the book, there's a point where you look at all the mums walking past with their prams, all really happy, and being like, oh, wait till you see. And I'll be honest, I don't agree with you. I found those early years much, much harder.
Right.
Much more stressful. But I think that is because I'm much better equipped now than 26-year-old me, to deal with myself. I'm a better human.
Right.
Because I've done lots of the things you talk about. So actually, I'm finding the teenage years so much easier.
Right,
than I
right.
found having, certainly, a 5-year-old, a 3-year-old, and a 1-year-old.
Well, you make a really good point. I mean, people's experience is so different, and how we're changing and developing as people. I didn't see how you could sort of separate out you as a person and you as a parent. I just the real breakthroughs were for me were to try and understand my own reactions to things. I'll give you an example because I just think it's so fundamental to your relationship with teenagers is how you yourself feel about control and to what extent you're trying to control other people and specifically to control teenagers. And again, because I was on this sort of quite a long journey of this 15-year period, and then the last 5 years really sort of trying to research it and talk to all sorts of people. When I was younger and before I spent a lot of time on the topic, I tried to be more controlling, basically. I still believed you could control. I would have maybe 3 or 4 different dishes on the table because different of the 5 children would want this or that. And I would scream upstairs and I'd say, dinner's on the table. And then no one would come downstairs because they'd all be blah, blah, whatever, up in their room. And then I'd scream again. And then naturally, dinner didn't go that well because I was trying to force them to come down. And I was already resentful because I'd done all this cooking. So to that point of not being calm when you first interact, I wasn't in my best space. And then I became more and more interested in the idea of stepping back from trying to be over controlling. And so I changed. I then just decided to cook what I wanted to cook, more or less. I shouted no. I just called calmly upstairs and I said it was dinner. And then I would sit down and I would be calm and in a good mood. And I'd have a nice glass of lemonade because I don't drink. And I'd have a copy of Hello magazine because I love magazines. And I would just start calmly eating dinner. And it might be on my own. And it took a while because no one could really believe this sort of change in how I navigated my relationship with them. And then, of course, the less you try and force people to do things, the more easily they come. And a couple of girlfriends said to me, well, if I did that, my teenagers wouldn't eat. And I thought, well, have you ever come across a teenager who's not hungry? No,
Yeah,
they are going
that's
to
a
come
ludicrous
down.
notion.
And it was just so interesting, the different way we were connecting when I wasn't trying to control and force. And I was just calm. And of course, they were much more likely to come. And they did come. And the family meals went way better because I wasn't in that kind of forcing.
I think it's a great example. And I think, obviously the glaring thing there is the thing that's changed there is you, not the teenagers. And again, we can shift. I'd really pull that back to relationships with partners as well. Like you can only change what you're doing. And I think the other thing is you've got, when I was reading about this in the book, this really jumped out at me. You've got this picture in your head of what dinner looks like.
Yeah.
Of what a family dinner looks like in a good family that are doing things properly, and I'm
Yeah,
being a good mum,
yeah.
and things are going well, and this is what it's going to look like. That's not happening, and that's the stress. So you've got to
Completely.
let go of that picture. And I've really found that actually in our house, that really sort of letting go of these ideals, and everyone's like, families that eat together sort of thrive, and it's like, but what if no one wants to? Because
Exactly.
actually, you talk in the book about like reading teenagers and being like, is what they're saying in line with their physicality and their facial expression? And
Yeah,
I know sometimes it's like, I really want us to all sit down together on a Sunday, and they're like, yeah, cool. And I'm like, no, actually, you don't want to. And your life is hard as well. And this is your free time. And I love you. And there's lots of other ways we can connect. We don't all have to fall into my image right now.
exactly. And there's some really nice little practical things you could do, like a sandwich night. You just get really nice bread, a pile of cheese, some ham, some tomatoes, and then everybody just makes their own bloody sandwiches. Doesn't have to be this kind of perfect thing, but that's practical. But on a really more profound level, what you're actually saying is really interesting because it's actually about our expectations. And it's our expectations, and there's a lot of judgment there, because one of the ways we control people is we make people right and wrong, and we make how we're behaving right and wrong. And then shame comes into it, because if you've done it wrong, you feel ashamed. So it's a very liberating thing to sort of step back from a judgment, as you say, this is what a perfect family looks like. And of course, social media feeds into this, because lots of parents feel really pressurized because they see all these perfect sort of mum influencers or whatever types where everything's perfect, supposedly. And that's a huge pressure. And the pressure is partly this idea, as I say, of there are right and wrong ways of doing things, rather than really reading the room, reading the teenagers in the room and what's really happening for them, and then finding that connection about their true emotional reality, rather than forcing an outcome, having a vision of what it should or ought to look like. So really easy steps are things like watch out wherever you say should and ought. They should bloody well come when I call, or they ought to eat their dinner, or those sorts of things. Are just their little kind of clues. And one of the things that's quite interesting to do is just to pause, sink into a kind of calm state of sort of pure awareness when you really tune in to what's going on for you, and just watch how often we're trying to control people. And I mean, first of all, it's ludicrous, because on the whole, we can't control anybody but ourselves.
Well, I think I'd like just to talk about that, because I think, one of the things that we're trying to do differently as a generation, and actually not just in terms of parenting, actually, like if you look at the workplace, this idea of kind of command and control
Yeah.
is falling out, and we're trying to be more collaborative. And there are people who say to me, actually, look at the political situation, look at big business. Basically, bullying and scaring people into doing what you want is still alive and kicking.
Yeah.
But all I can say to that is, it's never worked for me. Like, I've never had one, and I used to lose my shit with people all the time. It's never gone well. It's never got me what I wanted. And I think that as parents, what we're doing now is we're being like, actually, generally those things don't work. The only way you ever get people to do things is by persuading them they're in their own interests. And that's kind of where we're moving to. But really, through having teenagers, what I realized is exactly what you said, is that if you take away threatening and do what I say because I'm bigger than you and I can scare you,
Yeah.
you take those away and you can't make anyone do anything. And that is very it's been quite a painful, humbling experience for me,
Yeah.
but amazing growth has come from it, which is the kind of point of your whole book, I think.
Yeah. Look, and as you say, growth often is a little bit painful, but I'm really interested in what you're saying, because it's almost like, as well, find a lot of compassion for yourself, because the environment we're in and the world and society is based on trying to control people. And I think the only way you could sort of try and think of it with a little bit more positivity, because I know from talking to parents, they find it so hard to give up on the idea that they're in charge, is the intention behind it. So back to that teenage brain, which is sometimes, not fully developed. Sometimes if the intention behind the control is very caring and loving, that's the only way, I think. It's not a complete get out of jail, because I still don't think it's very effective, but at least the intention is a sort of loving intention.
Let's just expand on that a bit. Are you talking about, actually, there's some circumstances where I'm going to make decisions for you because that's what you need from me? What do you mean by, if I've
Well,
got the
no,
right
I mean,
intention?
I suppose what you would, if you say, for example, you were trying to control your teenagers using drugs, okay? And your desire to control them is coming from a loving place, because you don't want them to take an overdose, and you're coming from love and compassion. And that's your intention. It isn't like your earlier example of like fear and a power struggle.
hasn't that love always with parents? I feel like that love's always been behind there, and it's the tactic that was wrong, or the tactic that we've decided to, you know, you're
Well,
not going out, you're
I
not going to
look,
hang around with those people. Deep down, that was still about love. It's
well, I agree. I would return to the point that it is not a good, it is not effective way to get what you want. You're drawn to what you're told not to do, and that's
Oh
particularly
my God.
true.
I mean, my parents were really militant about me not watching anything above like a U rating on a
Right.
video. I just made it my life's mission
Of
to
course.
to to find the most violent, most grotesque, most sexually
Of
explicit
course. Of
content
course.
on
And
VHS. Like that's all I was interested in.
remember, everything is bathed in this sort of amniotic fluid of this huge desire for autonomy that teenagers have always got. So that's always the drumbeat going on underneath in the relationship. So I think what I found most effective in talking to lots of people is I quite like this sort of my big fat Greek wedding approach. And so I don't know if you ever saw the film, but the gist of it is that there's a woman who's basically trying to get this guy to marry her. And the simple notion is that her and her whole family are trying to get him to think it's his idea in the first place. So it's a little bit of a sleight of hand, and I don't completely going for being kind of manipulative, but
I
it's
get that though. That's
basically,
you're making. I feel like you're making persuading someone that something's in their own interest sound unnecessarily sinister.
yeah, I mean, yeah, that sounds bad, but yeah, I mean, I think you want to be as straightforward as possible. Having said you could be a bit sort of sneaky McCheeky, trying to make it like it's all their
But then,
idea.
but then also, I think part of that is being like, and look, if I can't persuade you, I've got to stand back and let you fuck it up.
Yeah, but I mean, you can share some really decent information about what's going on and what the situation is, and you can try and have a proper conversation, and you can choose your moment to have that conversation, that golden hour of 9 p.m, because of the circadian rhythms of teenagers. So they get up later, they go to bed later. 9 o'clock, and there's some lovely research around it, is a really good moment because you are a bit tired as a parent. You're less trying to boss them around and force outcomes, which we've already established is a waste of your time. You're slightly winding down, and they can kind of contract in, and they can come in and they can tell you something that's on their mind. They get to choose when the conversation starts. They get to choose when the conversation ends. They get to choose what the subject is. And it's from that place they're much more likely, you are much more likely to have a decent conversation. And that is a good time to share, what you know and what you're concerned about, whether that's about pornography or what they're seeing online or the risk of drugs or whatever it is that you're wanting to have a conversation where you're anxious as a parent, but you don't want to jump into this kind of control thing.
I didn't like that bit of the book because I go to bed at 9 o'clock and I was like, right, I'm going to have to shift my whole thing. But it made
Well,
the
I
thing
mean,
about their energy level
yes,
and our ludicrous attempts to try and get them to go to bed early, that was so spot on for what I've been through. It's like, no, we can't, I can make you go and lie in your room, but you are not tired at this time.
exactly. It's like the
Absolutely
ludicrous
not.
thing. It's like, right, go and sit at that table. You're not hungry, but you're going to sit there till you're hungry. It's like, it's just
Yeah.
ludicrous.
Yeah, what a waste
And
of
it just
life.
so doesn't sort of, and it's also why I think the timing of the day is so interesting for parents of teenagers, because mornings are so stressful for so many teenage parents. And of course, the reason is that it's a disaster, the timing of the school day. I'm right off school, but that's because I'm a bit of,
The sort of pointlessness of the secondary school system is its own whole podcast, so we can't go down that road.
we can't go down that route. But what I would say is I worked with a really nice nutritionist on, because I kept trying to find really practical ideas. It's super stressful in the morning. You want your teenagers to have something to eat. So I talked to a nutritional therapist. She said you just get some wholemeal BAPs. You could do it the night before. Put in some cream cheese, which is good, slow release. Fat, as we know, fills people up. It's got some vitamins in there, bit of vitamin D. If you're extravagant and you can afford it, some smoked salmon for some oily fish for those omega-3s, which are really good for the brain. The wholemeal BAP is slow release energy. Shove it in their backpack and they can eat it on the bus. And then they've got some slow release, good nutrition to power their brains through the day. And that just check out of the big breakfast row. Just power struggles are no fun, especially not as a bloody teenage parent. They're younger than you, they've got more energy than you, they might be bigger than you. And who wants a power struggle? Certainly not first thing in the morning.
Well, I thought what was amazing about your book actually was that you had this kind of very actionable, detailed advice about that, about bedtimes, but then also you were basically saying, and let go of the idea that you can achieve optimum health for them all the time. Like
Oh my God. I mean, I
they're
feel
not
so.
going to get as much sleep as you're being told they're going to get, and they'll catch up at some point. They're going to eat disgusting ultra processed food. Can you get them to eat and I really, I was like, mums who are struggling with breastfeeding need to read this, because this
Oh,
is the
that's
thing
so
that
sweet of you.
I want to tell them. It's like, do not get obsessed with making everything optimum health. It is unsustainable. You've got to understand that actually these kids are going to survive, and you will whip yourself into a frenzy being like, they're never going to have sugar, or they're never going to have, and everything's always going to be perfect. It can't be.
Also, you're going to end up super stressed yourself, which we've already established is a really lousy way to communicate. And I have noticed this a lot. And I mean, this might sound a bit extreme, but it's almost like we've become such warriors as parents. And it's almost like there's a sort of competitive worrying. And I get it. It's almost like if you're worrying, you're doing something, and it's kind of good to worry. Let's all worry more. And, people talk about anxious teenagers. Well, sometimes it's actually much more about anxious parents. And then there's that kind of flowing between, who's really anxious in the room right now? Is it really teenagers, or is it actually really the parents? And this whole thing of us being so anxious, is not a good model for anybody. Well, it's not obviously good for us, but it isn't actually a good model for them either. We want to be being examples of how to kind of keep steady, keep calm as best we can.
We have this gendered anxiety gap that you point out really early on with, the playground with the mums hovering near the kind of monkey bars, and if it's just dad there, he's sort of like reading the paper whilst the
Yeah.
kid sort of hangs upside down in peril. And this is a kind of really traditional, and one could argue that it has function, and it's really good to have those two different roles, and that mothers can kind of nurture and sort of keep it closer to infancy, and men push outwards, push forward, push towards the adult world. How do we deal with that as a couple? Because that is unquestionably an easier job for men, because it involves doing
Well,
less.
it does tend to be a bit gendered, and there is some research, so we're not being stereotypical here, but on the whole, dads are that bit more relaxed, mums are that bit more nervous. By the way, be compassionate to the mums, because a lot of teenage mums are also menopausal because they've had children later, so their hormones are going crazy just at the time when their teenagers are arriving.
So you've got that chemical side, but also you've got, deep down as a society, we still think it's mum's job. And if stuff goes wrong, it's still like they still feel a lot more judged than men do about things going wrong. So I think we've got to have that compassion as well as men.
I was a full-time working mum, and you feel guilty, and so you feel on the back foot. And of course, there's all the tropes about father as the provider. And I'm not saying that dads don't also miss that time with their children, but
we don't feel guilty.
They don't feel guilty in quite the same way. So mums
we
coming
feel we're
home,
doing the thing we're supposed to do. I just think that's a really important thing that I've got a friend, she's a director, he's an actor. Her journeys away are fraught with guilt. When he's at home with the child, he's like, I can't properly enjoy it because I'm not doing the thing I'm supposed to be doing, which is making money.
Sure.
We feel sometimes guilty when we're there.
Sure. So there's also this kind of very conscientious gene in quite a lot of mums, so anxious striving. We're, for a lot of people, the first generation. My mum didn't work in that way. We're the first generation who's had these opportunities. So we're damned if we're not giving it our all of which means that, the whole parenting thing can come with a whole bunch of guilt attached. It's really helpful in a family to represent different perspectives. Okay? So dad being a bit more relaxed.
We don't have to be united.
Okay, so this is a tricky pivot, because on the one hand, what I think I was saying was that this is good to give different perspectives and different ways of parenting, and that is a useful corrective to the overly judgmental right-wrong view of the world right now, which is that people can see things differently and you can parent differently. Having said that, I was slightly annoyed to find that there was quite a lot of evidence about how, on the whole, certainly on certain things, teenagers do need us to line up, because they can't easily cope if one person says something completely different to another. So you may have to navigate some areas and come together in some kind of compromise about what, like curfews, or what your view is on drinking, or there may be some sort of areas where you're going to have to sort of slightly both compromise, because that's going to be better for your
Yeah,
teenage.
I mean, if you think back to your own childhood, a lot of your book is like about going with the grain, right?
Sure.
About this is what's happening. If you think back to your own childhood, we all had one parent who we'd tap up for money, and
Sure.
one parent we'd tap up for a later bedtime or to be
Sure.
allowed out. You know who to go to, so you know those things are different anyway.
Sure.
But
And
the
I mean, and also maybe it doesn't have to be either or. I mean, actually, my ideas are forming in conversation with you right now, which is that both can be alongside each other. It's not one or the other. You know, you can have a bit of both. I.e., you can experience difference. You can hear different opinions at the table, which is, by the way, a really useful practical thing. Again, is as much as you can to try and discuss things where there could be different opinions. So, the Middle East, or I don't know, anything where it's possible to see it differently, and then have those conversations to open up this sense of there are ways of seeing the world differently. I just think that's so important for young people right now, because we're in this very judgmental world, a lot of this right, wrong stuff. Teenagers themselves are absolutely terrified of sort of being cancelled, saying the wrong thing. It's really scary for them out there online.
I find that easiest to do with films or TV
Yes, nice
series.
one.
I find
Very
that
nice.
that's easier. You know, it's like, what's going on there? What do we think of what that guy did? You know, that seems to yield really fruitful conversations
Yeah, a
with
nice
me.
practical one on that, which is maybe not for all families, but we're big readers, and we all have Kindles, and I mean, obviously my children are older now, but there were times when on holiday, for example, we might all read the same book, and then
That's
originally.
like my. It sounds really smug, but that is my
I know
absolute
it does.
favorite thing to do with my eldest daughter, who's a big reader. We both read the
Right.
same book at the same time, and that's amazing. And do you know what? My middle one less so, and that's got to be fine too.
It does sound a little bit holier than thou and all the rest of it, but
Yeah,
it's an interesting thing to have a safe topic on which to disagree. And you
yes.
can still love someone, and one of you can hate the book and the other of you can love it. And actually, and now this is going to just show how messed up I am and how much work I've had to do in a way, and why I've, given my life to all of this stuff, really, is that, I had to sort of learn that it was okay if my teenagers saw things differently to me. And that didn't mean they didn't love me. I mean, that just sounds pathetic, doesn't it? But it's back to sort of attending to your own emotional welfare, i.e., difference of opinion and different feelings about things that can coexist with connection and love. It doesn't mean just because someone rejects your opinion, it doesn't mean they reject you.
I mean, what I got from a sort of general takeaway from all the advice, one of the questions that I ask at the beginning of this podcast is, why did my parents appear to have so much conviction as parents, and I have absolutely none? And actually, what I got from your book was that my complete lack of conviction is a real gift with teenagers,
Yeah,
because it's just not I was like, I don't know if this is right, or it makes everything a much easier conversation if you don't have that idea of right or wrong in your head.
completely. I mean, one of my favorite phrases is the wonder and delight of uncertainty. And it's very interesting, the link between anxiety and trying to grip things. So control often segs back to anxiety. So when you're anxious, you try and control it. So this is why, for example, again, very practical, really watching transitions. So, ending of a year group or your own transitions as a parent, because most of us become very anxious around change because we're resistant to change and we're very nervous of it. And we can't just go with the, you might say go with the flow or the wonder and delight of uncertainty. We always feel we need to know exactly what's going to happen. And I tell you how this manifests itself most commonly among parents is they have narratives about what it means, for example, if their child doesn't get a string of A stars. And they have the whole thing mapped out. Oh, well, they're not going to get to uni. They'll never get a job. They'll be sleeping on the embankment by the time they're 40. And actually, this is all about this idea that they're trying to control, but also they're resisting change. And there's no wonder and delight of uncertainty. Who's to say the child that, isn't interested in the very narrow academic offering that most schools offer, he could be the next, Bill
Richard
Gates
Branson.
who dropped out, or Richard Branson, or all the people who saw life differently and did things differently. But we try and box people in and control them because we ourselves are so anxious about uncertainty and not knowing exactly what's going to happen. And so much of the way that life is structured is this drumbeat. You tick that box and then you tick that box. And I did it myself, and I'm only now throwing it off. Watch me go, Alex. I'm going to go crazy. I just ticked all the boxes. I went to St. Paul's. I got all the A-levels. I went to Oxford. I was the runner-up in this Vogue talent competition. Then I worked at the Times. I did everything that I was sort of expected to do. And I'm not saying it was all a mistake, but who's to say if I had sort of embraced uncertainty and not fulfilled a lot of expectations that I felt, I might have done something very different, which is what I'm going to do now. Woo!
Yeah. I mean, I think, I am, look, my parents' generation had this utter conviction that going to university was the way into a completely different life, right? And quite what he
Absolutely.
thinks he would have achieved had he gone, but it's obviously something that he really felt. He felt the lack of it. And he just had this complete conviction that that's what, so you all do those things. And then it sort of got to the end and was like, I don't, so what am I doing?
100%.
I didn't think any of this
And I
through,
mean,
actually.
by sort of keeping ticking boxes and being so conscientious, this anxious driver. And, I had 2 major depressive episodes and I ended up in a psychiatric hospital. So it didn't work out that well for me, except that it led to trying to imagine things differently and crucially imagining things differently for my own children. And it's not about my expectations and it's not about ticking my boxes. It's about really trying to get them to line up with what they want to do and what's their dream and what's their vision.
Right, which is the process of individuation. Really.
Yeah, 100%.
I want to there's this brilliant bit of the book. We've been talking a lot about anxiety and control, and I just want to come back to judgment,
Right.
and which is obviously connected to those. But you make a very compelling case that the way to feel less judged is to do less judging. Tell us how to do it.
Well, I think the first thing to establish is why we want to stop judging. The reason we want to try and step away from some of these judgments is that when we judge other people, we tend to also judge ourselves. And then we get into the sort of not good enough and the judging narrative. I'm not spending enough time with my children. All these sorts of stories that
it doesn't feel like that in the moment. Judging other people, particularly if you're parenting, feels blissful, right? It's like dangerously. Honestly, when you said that, I was like, "Oh!" I literally just had a conversation with a mate, and he was like, "Well, I just think it's bad parenting," and I was like, "Yeah." Why do we love it so much? Because it doesn't feel like we're judging ourselves. It feels like something different.
Well, I think you're so right, because you're quite right. It is delicious to judge others. And in fact, it becomes very addictive, because what you then do is you then only look for evidence that confirms your judgment, because it feels so good to be right. And it feels so good to be better than the other parent that you will only find the evidence.
Why does that result in us judging each other more? Because we're using the same part of the brain, right? Or because how do those two link?
I think you're right. It's partly what we practice becomes habits, and our ways of thinking become our sort of neural pathways. We do know that that's true. So I think just generally getting into a sort of judging narrative more broadly, you want to really strongly think, you've got to have a really strong reason why you're not going to do it, because it feels so damn good. So that's why I started with the idea that actually you do want to step away from it, because what we really want, and I was a very judgy person of myself. Like, I needed to sort of achieve all these things, and I need to kind of get all these goals. And if I didn't, I was a failure. And it kind of led to all this depression and my whole life blowing up. I wanted to replace that with compassion and a much gentler story, Rachel to Rachel. So, we started this idea, you, Alex, you hang out with Alex all the time. Your main relationship with Alex. And my relationship is with my main relationship is with me. And I want to develop this gentle voice, this gentle inner voice, a kind of compassionate voice, a kind of nice, calm voice, a kind of forgiving voice, stepping away even from the idea that anything is a mistake. No, it's not a mistake. It was just a chance to learn and grow. And if we have that voice as a sort of interior voice to ourselves, we're more likely to have that voice going out. And the way you can tell, if you want a really practical way, you said, how are you actually going to make this happen? You feel good when you're gentler and more compassionate to yourself. You feel calm. You sleep better. You eat more healthily. You take better choices. You lean into what feels good. You spend time with people who are also kinder, gentler, and more compassionate. And you'll know, I sat next to somebody last night who literally was fig jam. Fuck, I'm great, just ask me. Who's just like a complete narcissist. And I just didn't feel good having this conversation. But because I've done so much work about what feels good, the people I want to hang out with. I want to hang out with you, Alex. It feels good talking to you, right? And it's such a simple thing, but you can become very much more self-aware and much more somatic work when you're aware of how your body's feeling. Do you feel all tense in your shoulders, or do you feel relaxed and loose and easy? And all of these things happen when we're less judgmental of others and of ourselves.
I had this image when you were, when we were talking about how do those two link, where basically, like, if I'm judging someone, I am stood on a stepladder, right?
Yeah.
Let's say that I'm stood on a stepladder and I'm looking down at them.
Yeah.
But actually, if I imagine a world where there's no stepladders, and that's how I approach the world, I never get to get up on the stepladder, then it's a world without stepladders, and no one can ever do it to me. No one ever gets to do it to me. So it's like that, isn't it? It's like looking at the whole landscape as a different thing. Oh no, I can't climb up there, because then I'll leave that behind for someone to climb up and do it to me.
100%. So for me, it is a false manufactured opinion of a hierarchy, which, of course, I understand organizations having to have a sort of structure to run them. That's not the same as fundamentally believing in a hierarchy that some people are more important than us. They're not. They're not. Okay? If once you've dismissed the idea of hierarchical view of the world, you no longer relate suck up, kick down, which is some people are somehow, more important than you. Somebody serving your coffee is less important than you. Why is that in our interest? Because, again, what do we want? We want connection.
So Terry Real, who I'm desperately trying to get on the show, would say that what you've just described, that is the real damage of patriarchy.
Right.
And women don't get out of it either. They carry some blame for maintaining this thing as well, because we all believe in this kind of structure of right and wrong and higher and lower and dominion over.
Right.
And I think that's really interesting.
And it does feed back into family life and parenting, which is that briefly we seem to have power over these extraordinary children of ours. But I come back to Khalil Gibran, who's this incredible American Lebanese poet who I'm obsessed by. And he's got this wonderful poem. He says, "Your children are not your children. They're the fruits of life's longing for itself. They come through you." And then he's got this image and he says, "To be the bow that is stable from which the arrow shoots forth." And, we are not above them. We're not trying to, there isn't a hierarchy that they're kind of below us. We're trying to get to a point where we're connecting one human to another human.
What I took from that poem is that you're not mine, and I don't get to be either proud or ashamed of your actions. I think that's something quite. This sounds quite weird, but like I try not to be proud of my children. Like they're these
I completely
amazing
agree.
people. They're incredible. I mean, I've met your kids, right? They're just wonderfully charming. My children are amazing, and people are like, "God, you must be so proud." And I'm like, so it sounds really weird, but I no, because
It doesn't sound weird at all. It's very fundamental because it's to misunderstanding the relationship, and it's to misunderstand this idea of agency and control, which we don't have. And in
yeah.
addition, if you really want to go down this route of taking credit, like I just got into Oxford, which I heard a parent say about their 18-year-old, which is obviously the extreme, is that you're going to have to take responsibility for when things go really badly wrong.
Right, yeah, that's the other reason. It's like
So
they're
what,
obviously going to do terrible stuff as well, and I ain't taking the rap for that shit.
exactly. And no, look, I 100% agree. The other one I absolutely hate is you're only as happy as your least happy child. Well, if you've got 5 children, I'm fucked, basically. I'm never going to be happy,
Perpetually
right? Because,
miserable. Yeah,
I've
someone's
always
down.
got one of my children is always going to have something, going on for them. And this is honestly, we could talk all day, but this is another really important thing, which is this idea of, supporting them, assisting them, but not rescuing them and not seeing them as victims, that only we can sort them out. We want to be alongside them. We want to kind of breathe into their strengths. Again, if you want something very practical, is if your child, for example, is in a very difficult situation, say you have a teenager that is being bullied, for example, which is awful, and it's happened to me. My first attempt was to jump in, rescue, sort it out, see the teachers, read the riot act to the other parents. Honestly, you cannot believe how I went in there. Did I get anywhere? It made it worse. Another way of doing it is to be alongside that teenager, to support them, to assist them, but to believe in them and in their strengths. And in the end, the person who's going to get out of that situation is them. And hard as it is to say, we can't do it for them. We cannot go to the psychological gym for them. We can support them. And obviously this is delicate
I want to
because
give you a less extreme example
yeah,
because I think the bullying one is really awful.
yeah,
But so the other day, my son came home and he was upset because he hadn't done the right forms for his Duke of Edinburgh, and neither of his mate, but his mate was going on the trip and he wasn't. And I do this podcast and I'm really up on the thing you're just saying. And
yeah,
I looked at him and he's very like me. His emotions are very close to the surface. And he was very upset. And I did exactly what you did. I was like, mate, this isn't happening. I'm going to sort this. Right.
right.
And the
Okay.
reason I'm saying it is because
It's such a strong instinct.
it's such a strong instinct. Right.
I know.
And now, and it was dead easy to fix, but actually what I wish I'd done now and what I will really, what I won't look in his eyes. I feel like I'm not looking in your eyes because if they're slightly moist, I'll crumble. But I will say, look, this is how we're going to try and sort this. And we're going to learn something from it, right? We're going to charm that teacher and we're going to
nice.
work on what, because
Yeah.
this is how we get stuff sorted. So I'm not
yeah,
leaving him on his own to deal with the problem, but I'm not doing it for him.
assisting. Yeah. And look, it's tricky because in a way the bullying was not the best example because that can be so extreme. And obviously we haven't really talked about sort of, serious mental health problems. And there are occasions when, we are going to have to really get quite involved, notwithstanding everything we've said. But even in those situations, I talked to so many parents whose children had proper mental health problems who'd been engaging with the CAM system, child and adolescent mental health system, through my charity work as an ambassador for SANE, as an ambassador for Rethink Mental Illness. And every single time I said to that parent, or the psychologist who'd been treating them, or the psychiatrist, I said, what made the difference when they got better? Why do you think they got better? You know, so they'd had the therapy or the medication or whatever they'd had, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And again and again and again, they said that teenager, that child decided to get better. And that sounds really harsh on one level, but on another level, it's really extraordinary, because we've got to kind of tap into them finding that agency and that desire.
We're back to this idea, aren't we, that we just can't control even in a positive way. It's you're gonna be sick until you're not, and until actually you make a decision that you want something different.
I mean, what we can control
terrifying, really.
It is scary. It is scary. But I mean, we can control trying to be as calm and as steady and as supportive and getting the proper help and all those things. We can control that.
I don't want to leave. I want to talk to you again because we've not covered any of my questions. I wanted to ask about your work in prisons and masculinity, but maybe that's a different time. But what I really wanted to ask was,
well, one comment on that.
Yes.
I just want us to pivot away from even the phrase toxic masculinity. I want us to pivot to the positive. So what we focus on expands. And it seems to me we've got to focus on good role models, good examples, put our energy and focus. Anyway, we can come back to
that.
You're
preaching to the choir. I was on the dad strike this week. And all it was beautiful, amazing, connected fathers.
Brilliant.
And I'm like, I hear all this stuff about men not wanting to show up. I'm sure that is a lot of people's experience. They're just not. I don't know those men. I don't see them. There are great men out there. There really are.
Yeah.
So I guess what I wanted to ask, you don't really talk much about your partner. You have this phrase at the beginning, which is, your relationship with your partner is the amniotic fluid that they grow up in. What happens after they all move out to that relationship? Asking for myself.
Well, I mean, I think it goes back to some of the ideas we were sharing earlier. I mean, obviously, all relationships are constantly in flux. Your relationship with your teenagers, your relationship with your spouse. So, you are at a different sort of stage. Would you want to know what your relationship is like just with your spouse without the children being such a big part of it?
Because I think you work together, right? When things start going well, I think you have to make quite a few adjustments, and then you're this team, and you have this purpose, and then what happens?
It's true. I mean, it is different. But if you've read my book and you've done what I suggest, then hopefully you have got some adult to adult relationships with your grown up children. So I think it's overblown, this idea that, 1 minute you've got a house full of children and the next minute you haven't got any. And you've got no relationship left. No, you have got a relationship. You've built a relationship. Your whole journey as a parent has to be to have this relationship with this burgeoning adult. So it's not a completely black and white that 1 minute you've got nobody. And the next minute, you can have relationships with those children. You can hang out with them.
That's made me extraordinarily happy.
Yeah, of course.
It's a really great place to finish on. I think.
Yeah, I mean, my phone's gone twice during our interview. One's my 28-year-old, and the other was the 25-year-old. And I mean, they are adults, and I'm trying to be an adult. And we try to have a sort of adult to adult relationship, and it's super fun. So it only gets better, and you are learning and growing. So you're going to be absolutely phenomenal by the time you've been through all of this, and you've read my book. So you're going to fast forward,
sorted,
be this extraordinary person. Look at me, Anyway, no. So look, I think it just gets better and better.
Rachel's book is The Gift of Teenagers: Connect More, Worry Less. Rachel is on Instagram as Rachel Kelly Wellbeing, and you can find links to all her work on her website, rachel-kelly.net. Please follow me on Instagram at Be a Happier Parent, and I look forward to seeing you all next week.